And so Trinity Classical School is based on the trivium, which is the first three of the 7 liberal arts: grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And Dorothy Sayers, who was a British novelist, and she was a scholar, she made a tremendous contribution to the understanding of classical education in her essay, The Lost Tools of Learning, where she says that these 3 subjects of the trivium, the grammar, logic, and rhetoric, actually correspond to the stages of a child's development. And so what Trinity Classical School is doing is shaping an education around these 3 stages of learning. And let me explain to you what each one of those stages is. So the first one is the grammar stage. The grammar stage, which we see as roughly the elementary years, is called the grammar stage because every subject has a grammar to it. So English has a grammar to it, learning the parts of speech, but other subjects have basic building blocks to them as well. In math, it's the multiplication tables. In history, it's events and dates and people and battles. In literature, it's memorizing poems. And in every subject, in geography, it's places and mountain ranges and capitals and nations. And every subject has a basic building blocks to it. And what you have in these early years, this is what Dorothy Sayers says, in these early years of the elementary age, children have a tremendous capacity to memorize large amounts of data. And actually, it's the one time of life where memorization is actually gratifying, where memorizing all this amounts of information is much more difficult later in life. And so first of all, the classical model says during the grammar stage, during these early years, through songs, through chants, we're going to download a tremendous amount of information into these children's minds, and they actually enjoy doing it. They feel proud when they're learning new things. But we don't stay there. In the middle school years, we move into what's called the logic stage. This is the second of the second stage of the trivium, and during the logic stage, Dorothy Sayers says that middle schoolers are naturally becoming argumentative. They're beginning to challenge their parents and question their parents and ask why. And she says, okay, that's fine. You want to ask questions? You want to challenge? That's great. We're going to teach you how to do that well, though. And so this involves the teaching of formal logic and beginning to, as you study history, you're still learning about history, but history becomes something that you practice thinking on and you practice reasoning on, and you use the tools of logic to think through, and you learn relationships between different things. And this is really where the trivium, it becomes less about simply learning content, but creating learners, creating thinkers who know how to think well. And so that's why in the classical model, Latin is an important part of the education, because educators have found for centuries that Latin strengthens the muscles of the mind and teaches your mind how to make logical connections. And of course, it also has all kinds of value in learning the English language, because much of the English vocabulary has Latin roots. But it's valuable in learning all kinds of subjects in training of the mind. And that's the goal of a classical education, is not just learning subjects, but having a mind that's a learner. And so once through the logic stage, a child has learned how to reason, learned how to think well, they move into the rhetoric stage, which is really the goal of the whole trivium, is that a child doesn't know just how to think well, but they learn how to take information, to synthesize it, and then to communicate in ways that are persuasive and creative and innovative and thoughtful and winsome. And so they do this through speech and through reading the great works of literature that have shaped civilizations throughout history, and they learn from good communicators how to communicate well. And it turns out one of the things that modern educators are finding more and more is that coming into the modern world, there's so much information that is available to us on the internet, through Google. You have unimaginable amount of information accessible at our fingertips. And what a child needs in order to be effective in the modern world is not just to have a lot of information, but be able to work through a lot of information, synthesize it, and then communicate in a compelling and effective manner. This is exactly what the Trivium trains them to do. And so we have found that as schools have been starting up around the country and have been doing this for a couple decades now, the results have been very powerful. And so we want to invite you to come learn more. This is a brief introduction to what a classical and a Christian education looks like.